Okay? So be thinking about it.
You actually have a slightly, little more time to think about your questions. Still got to open the presentation.
No, well, I mean at the end.
At the end, at the end.
And we're all still waiting to hear about tomorrow. I asked around at the offices over there before I came over here. No one knows it. In terms of classes being canceled. So I don't know. We don't know yet.
All right, well, on that note. So, what I'm going to show you guys now is we're going to switch gears. We've been talking about rendering for quite some time. Now we're going to talk about crowd simulation, which actually is, which is my specialty. While I do a lot of rendering, I'm also responsible for making crowds move. So this is sort of an art of crowds. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the technology evolved over the years at Pixar, explain some of the techniques we use, and illustrate them with some case studies. So yes, you've seen my background a number of times. But first, why are crowds even important? They serve a number of roles in film. The first is probably think of a spectacle. Take a look at that clip from The Lion King. How cool was it to see that many wildebeest come right at you at screen? It really increased the stakes and the drama of that scene. It's often, whether it's the Battle of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, or even just a giant parade from Ghost of the Shell 2 or something. Crowds add an element of spectacle. Or in the center of Bangkok today, I'm sure the crowds add some element of spectacle. The other thing they do is make worlds more realistic. While a lot of people will focus on making real sets for a CG film, the sets are not populated with beings that appear to be sentient and inhabiting them, the world looks less real. So for the Axiom on WALL-E, having robots fill the hallways help the world feel real and inhabited. And finally, there's reaction. Illustrated below from a clip in Bug's Life, and you see a bunch of ants react to the action in the foreground between Flip and the Queen. And also when the caterpillar, watching the crowds react to the action gives you a sense of how the world perceives the protagonist in general. So we often have stadiums and crowds to sort of accentuate the reaction of the world to the action we see. Spectacle, realistic world, and reaction. That's why we have crowds in film. However, the reason we don't have a lot of crowds in film is because they're hard for a number of reasons. Think about how long it takes to animate a single character. Imagine doing that on hundreds. Even with the technical tricks I'll be showing you guys, quantity and iteration speed, very difficult. Rendering, what we talked about, all day before, is harder with crowds. They really push the limit of speed and memory. And even creating a diverse looking crowd is very challenging. You often have to create many different characters with many different grades, many different texture maps. So the asset creation can be quite challenging. Finally, if your crowds are doing things like wearing clothing or have hair, well then your simulation problem is now magnified by the number of characters you have on the screen. So there's a lot of reasons why crowds seem to get pushed off of a film's budget, but there are a lot of reasons to have them in your film, for the reasons before, spectacle, reaction, and realistic worlds. So those are the things we have to balance when deciding how much crowds are in the film and what techniques we use to simulate. Now the way we do it at Pixar is we break crowds down into two teams that tackle it. The crowds team and the crowds animation team. The crowds team consists of technical directors. As mentioned further, that usually have a fair amount of technical skills. They're responsible for both implementing the crowd pipeline and any improvements that can be made, as well as setting up the shots and doing the first stage of motion generation. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means later. They also provide the technical support for the crowd animators. The crowd animation team They work on creating all the individual clips of motion that we'll be using to sequence together to form the crowd motion. That includes the delegation and tracking. Crowd animators also do shot fixes on individual characters and the crowd shot when needed. And the crowd animators are also the eyes of the crowd team. They give all of the artistic feedback before we bring these shots to the director, as well as after the shots are final, make sure that any fixes are done before we consider it blessed. Now, I have a bullet point there for resource implications, because how many people you have at each team, at what stage of the pipeline, has an effect on how productive the team is. This is a slide I often show to producers when asking about, to cast individual people in various teams. So personally, I usually lead the crowds team on Pixar films. So you'll often see me credited along with another person who's the lead of the crowd's animation team. So on Brave, it was Paul Mendoza, so it's always the two Pauls that are the crowds people that are doing things. But anyway, it's usually two teams that we have to go around. So with that, let's take a look at how we've done crowds on various films. Does anyone know the first Pixar film that had a crowd in it? Any guesses? Toy Story. That's a good guess. That's as early as you can get. But let me tell you, it's not Toy Story. Knowing that, what do you think the first Pixar film is? Another crowd. There was a hint in an earlier slide.
Lion King.
Lion King. Actually, it's funny, that was not a Pixar film, but there were people that ultimately became Pixar TVs that worked on that film.
I would say what's all of them.
All of them. Well, a lot of them do, but Bug's Life, when you consider all the ants, the crowds of ants in the film, that was our first film where we had a crowds department, a crowds team, and a crowds animation team. And the way we tackled the crowds is very much like how characters are animated in video games. Using small clips of animation that are sequenced together using something called a finite state machine, which I'll explain in more detail. But let me first show you what it looks like. So in the next shot, I'll show you a bunch of shots where these ants are playing back clips of animation and changing which clip they're playing based on some information in their environment. And this system was called Fred for some reason. Oh, let me get some volume. The rocks in the ceiling were falling, the crowds were reacting around the rocks, and they said ooh and ah at about the same time. They all started running at a certain point. And I'm not going to go into the details of how that's done just yet. They'll come soon. Let me show you a different way to do crowds. On Nemo, we had a system called Pisces that was just designed to do one thing: make fish move. This is pretty much a fish flocking system. There's a single model, actually. So we didn't have a model per fish. There's one model where you entered how many fish there should be instead of what their behavior should do. It had some cool features. All this did was do locomotion. It had nothing to do with which animation they were playing. All this system did was make the root translation, basically move the character in space. Whereas the other system was all about what animation clip the character was playing. This one was all about locomotion. But it has some cool features where we can make it match an image to do these kind of, I think these are sardine effects. So that was one way we did craft, but it was very fish specific, only really applied to that film. On Cars, we had a new system called Barney that was very similar to that finite state machine system we had on Bug's Life. And at this juncture, I'm going to actually explain what this system looks like and how to use it. But you can see we use it for very large stadiums. So let's talk about what do I mean by finite state machine. For a stationary crowd, that is one that's not typically walking around, usually staying in one place, you can use a system called a finite state machine that controls which individual clip of animation is played at which time per agent. So you can think of it as just going from one state to another. On cars, we had a system called Barney that did this, and I'm going to show you how it would work in a shop. Actually, not on cars. I'm going to show you an example from Up, where we also use this system. So here's what we get from layout, which is just a bunch of stationary models that are kind of placeholders for where the crowd will be, that are set up by the layout department. So this is what we start with. That's not very bright. Let me, can we lower the lights a little bit? Sorry. All right, let's see if we can get this over. There we go. So you can see we have a bunch of dogs in the back. That layout gives us. Now it's our job to figure out how many clips of animation do we need to make those dogs move. There's about 14 of them. You could do it by hand, but I think this is small enough to really illustrate the point. Turns out we need 5. One of them of the dog walking, 3 of them of the variations of the dog standing, and 1 transition that goes between the dogs walking to the dogs standing, looking menacing. With those clips of animation, we then build this little state machine graph that has 3 states. One is one is walking, the very top one, which is the start state. That goes down to the middle one, which is walk to stand. The final one is a state for standing that contains all 3 of those standing clips. Note that only the last one has an extra little arrow that loops on itself. That implies the standing clip is a cycle, that it can loop indefinitely. And all of those 3 clips in it are compatible with each other, the same start and end state. So what will happen to this is the agent will do 1 walk, play the transition, and then go into that standing state. And if we vary their starting time, you get something that looks like this. They walk forward and then they stand. And it's timed so that they stand about when those dogs confront Doug walking through there. Beyond that, we usually do something called lookout refinement, where we have a tool that can make all the characters look at a certain point on screen at a certain time. So we get some head turns from that. And finally, with animation fixes, we'll also just make something where like, the screen left will add an extra step to a dog. So that's a very simple example of a finite state machine. So, and you might not even think of this as a crowd shot. There's so few characters. But where this becomes powerful is when you can start doing this on larger and larger crowds. We just happen to have those animation clips anyway from other dog crowds, so we use this technique on the shot. A more elaborate state machine might look like this. So this looks pretty big. What this is for the audience, for the stadiums of cars and film cars. On the left side is one type of cheering. On the right side is another type of cheering that is far more energetic. And in this shot, or rather there are 2 different types of cheering. A lot of these things can transition to each other, but notice how some of those edges are red. Those represent transitions that only occur when a certain trigger in the environment happens. We call those trigger transitions. And in this state machine, we go from this generalized but very varied cheering all to a wave clip where the cars raise their hood and flash their headlights. And that was used in this shot, where a bunch of cars are basically in a wave, like at a baseball game or a football game, flashing their headlights. And the reason they do it all in coordinated is because we have like a cylinder in space, a spatial trigger that is passing through the crowd, and then they're all taking those transitions in that state machine at that specific time. So I'm going to turn the lights back on because I think that's it for now. All right, I don't want to put you guys to sleep. So that's an example of a finite state machine. And I bet you can tell this is used in games a lot. Think about playing a game like, I'm dating myself. Who here has played Street Fighter 2? Tekken? I'm thinking, what's the most popular tournament fighting game in Thailand?
Dead or Alive?
What was that?
Just to try Dead or Alive.
Dead or Alive?
Chrono Trigger.
Well, think of a video game. Normally your character is playing some clip of animation when you're not moving it. Like Mario, Super Mario Bros. Everyone's playing that, right? So in Mario, when he's not moving, usually he's just standing still, but once you press forward, he plays a clip where he's running, and when you hit A to make him jump, I think it's A, he then transitions to a jump cycle. That's very similar to what we're doing here. Games are typically animated through finite state machine, so are crowds at the most basic level. So that's kind of the approach we took, at least in Bug's Life, as well as Cars. Now, I already showed you guys about shrink wrapping, so I'm going to skip this, but suffice to say, we needed that to render those cars. I'm going to skip that a little bit. The other way we animated cars when they're moving on a road was through a system called behavior. So it's important to understand the limitations of a finite state machine. At least at the most basic level, it just goes from one clip to another. It doesn't tell you where